Okay, so thanks everybody for coming out tonight to this Baker Institute Student Forum event. I know it's a pretty busy week. We've got all sorts of tests coming up, and it's amazing that spring break is just a few weeks away. But this event is worth your time. It's going to be a great event. We have with us today Dr. Lynn Vavreck, who is a professor of political science and communications at UCLA. Dr. Vavreck's book, The Message Matters, was published by Princeton University Press and has been heralded by political scientists as path-breaking and as a model for political science research. And Dr. Vavreck is not just one of those political science professors who writes articles in journals that no one reads. She actually communicates with people across a broad spectrum. She's written blog posts. She's really been accessible and appears in media events, and is somebody who really, I think, tries to connect the insights from political science and the academy to a broader audience. And she's also the director of, let me make sure I get this right, it's a center at UCLA. Okay, you want to help me out on this? I don't remember. It was something, the study for campaigns? Exactly. Okay, Center for the Study of Campaigns. How about that? So Dr. Vavreck is the head of that, and she did a groundbreaking 2006 longitudinal study during the election that year. And tonight she will be talking to us about the 2012 election and the role the economy will play, and most importantly, how the messages of the candidates will shape the outcome. So with no further ado, I'd like you all to please help me introduce and give a warm welcome to Dr. Lynn Vavreck. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Miles. And thanks to all of you guys for inviting me to come out and talk to you about the 2012 election. This is sort of my debut talk about 2012. So I've done a lot of writing about it on various blogs, but I haven't actually spoken about it. So this is sort of the kickoff of that. So you'll be a good test case. Okay, so here's where we're going to start. I want you guys to just brainstorm, think, yell out, what do you think Mitt Romney should run on? What should his campaign message be going into the 2012 election? If you were his strategist, you're advising Stuart Stevens, and you're saying, this is what I think that Mitt Romney should run on, what would it be? Who's got one? Yes?
Obama didn't fix the economy.
Okay, Obama didn't fix the economy. Seems like Romney's on that one, right? Okay, what else? Any other ideas?
Obama not only didn't fix the economy, he's making it worse.
Okay, so he's making it worse. Anything else? Yep. Okay, so Romney should say that he has experience in the private sector. He seems to be on that message as well. All right, anybody else? We'll do one more.
The deficit is too big.
Okay, the deficit is too big. Okay, well, this is my answer to that question. If I were advising Mitt Romney, let's try this one more time. Okay, guys in the booth, what am I doing wrong? This is not the clicker? This has to be the clicker, right? There's a big buildup for...
Okay, I'm going to see if David's still outside.
the anticipation is killing you, I know. I think it's on because it... Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, great. Good, we're good. Okay, so this is what I would tell Romney to run on. Some variant of this. America is coming back. We can do anything. We're still the most powerful place on earth, a place that people dream about coming to. No nation on earth has ever had the opportunities that America has. And now we have a global frontier, the most promising frontier we've ever seen. Follow me. Together, we will compete and win the global economy as Americans, the greatest nation on earth. So what stands out to you about this little sort of message snippet? Anything in particular? Is it about the economy? Yeah. Okay. All right. In what way? Okay. Who's we?
America.
Okay. Right. So the thing that should jump out to you about this is the number of times that in this message that is purportedly about the economy, the global economy, I've used the word American. Okay, so this is a message that I think is a winner for Romney. And it's kind of like the message that Gingrich is trying to convey when he says Obama's obsessed with this Saul Alinsky vision of America. Okay, so Gingrich is a little bit on this already. Romney, not so much. So this is, I think, how Romney wins. This, I think, is how Romney loses. Okay, 3 years ago, a newly elected Obama told America if Congress approved his plan to borrow $1 trillion, he would hold unemployment below 8%. Hasn't been below 8%. This week, he's trying to take a bow for 8.3%. Not so fast, blah, blah, blah. So everybody's read this. This was Romney's speech in Nevada the other night after winning the Nevada caucus. Okay, so a lot of similarities here to the things you guys suggested that Romney should run on. Okay, I should stipulate that I'm using Romney here just as an example. I do think he will get the nomination, but it's quite possible that someone else could get it. It's unlikely, I think. But so we're just going to use him as an actor in this role tonight. Okay, so this I think is how Romney loses. And what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is try to convince you guys that this is a losing message for Romney and that the America message is a winning message. And I'm going to try to lay out why I think that's the case. Okay, so what's wrong with Romney's message about jobs in the current electoral context? Okay, so we're going to look at some data here. On the y-axis, we've got the share of the two-party vote. So the incumbent party's share of two-party vote. Okay. Okay, so that's over there. All right. On the x-axis, I'm going to plot for you the unemployment rate. Okay, the unemployment rate. This is what Romney was talking about. That is 8.3%. Okay, so we just had that nice number come out on Friday. Okay, so here we are. We're going to be somewhere in here in 2012, right? So let's see what other elections look like that. Okay, 1980. So there's Jimmy Carter losing in 1980. Okay, 1992. There's George H.W. Bush losing. Okay, 1976. There's Gerald Ford narrowly losing in one of the closest elections in U.S. presidential history. Okay, so not looking too good. Oh, but there's 1984. Okay, 1984, there's Ronald Reagan in his big sweeping Morning Again in America re-election. Yes, in that election, unemployment was at about 8%. Okay, so the question is, what's going to happen in 2008? Where along this line, where's the dot going to be? Is it going to be down here with these dots, or will it be up there with 1984? Okay, well, maybe if we fill in the rest of the elections, it'll show us a picture, and we can say, oh, that 1984, that's an outlier. It doesn't really belong there. And we'll see a nice trend line, and we'll know that 2008 belongs down here in this corner. So what happens when we bring the other elections in? Okay, not so great of a pattern. Right, we see them spread out up and down the y-axis all over the x-axis. Hard to see a pattern there. And in fact, if we drew a very simple regression line through these dots, it would look like this. It's relatively flat. This line is essentially flat. There's no relationship between the unemployment rate and the incumbent share of the two-party vote. Okay, so any talking about the unemployment rate, this is unrelated to incumbent two-party vote share. So already, you know, Mitt Romney, shush, no more talking about that, right? This is not helping. Okay, but here's a picture that looks better. So what's this? This is the change in the unemployment rate, okay, from the fourth quarter of the year before the election to the second quarter of the election year. Okay, so for the 6 months before the election, when we look at the change in the unemployment rate, we see a nice linear trend. Higher rate increases are worse for the incumbent. Okay, and if you look at where the 50% mark is, it's actually in positive territory. So if we were guessing, we would say a president can still do pretty well by the unemployment rate if he holds it at 0. Even if it increases slightly, he's not penalized for that. Okay, so this looks even better. This is even a little bit of a tighter fit to the line. Okay, this is GDP, so growth, economic growth, and incumbent two-party vote share. Okay, so here we see a little bit of a steeper line. It's in fact quite a bit steeper, and the fit is better. So increases in growth in the 6 months before the election are good for the incumbent party. Okay, so let's think about where we are in 2012. Going into this election, we're seeing a declining unemployment rate. Okay, so we're living over here. Okay, and as long as we're over in here, that's good for Obama. And we're seeing increases in growth. GDP is a weird number, and you got to be careful if you use it. If you're using an annualized number, if you're not using annualized, if it's chained or not. So it's, but we want to be looking for about 1% growth in GDP in the 6 months before the election, non-annualized. So that's looking pretty good for Obama. It's seeming like he's going to get that. So things look pretty good if you're Barack Obama. So we've got Romney out there talking about the level of unemployment, but yet it's the trend that matters, and the trend favors Obama. And historically speaking, incumbent party candidates in growing economies almost always win elections, okay, as do challenging parties in bad economies. Okay, so the economy is a really robust and regular feature of American presidential elections. And if your life depended on it and you had to guess who was going to win the next American presidential election, and you could only know one piece of information, I suggest you find out what the growth number is in the 6 months before the election. If you only knew that and you made a prediction, you would be right 80% of the time, okay, taking the last 60 years of elections. You don't need to know anything else. You don't need to know who the nominees are. It doesn't matter who it is, who the vice presidents are, completely irrelevant. You need to know who the incumbent party is, and you need to know this growth number, and you'd almost always be right. Okay, so here are some simple forecasting models. So I've taken 4 of the most popular forecasting models in political science, and I've listed the actual incumbent party vote share, two-party vote share, and then the range of predictions that these 4 models give us. And the one thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that the predictions, although the point estimates are all different, okay, we're not predicting vote shares. We're just predicting winners here. Okay, so I don't want to get it exactly right to a point. I just want to be able to tell you which party is going to win. So the thing to take away here is that most of these predictions are all on the same side of the 50% mark, even though they're different point estimates. There are the 2 years where they cross 50. So in 1976, we get mixed predictions, and in 2008, we get mixed predictions. Some models predicting a win, some predicting a loss. But in all the other years, it's pretty consistent. These odd cases are driven by the Campbell model includes a Gallup trial heat result from like right before the election. And sometimes that really tweaks that one forecast a little bit more. So that's where we get the 47 up there. Okay, so mostly we are predicting consistently no matter what kind of economic and political variables we put in. Okay, we can predict which parties, we predict the same party's going to win. Okay, now if we take those predictions and we line them up and say, if you were advantaged by the economy and predicted to win, do you win? And here's what I'm saying to you. Most of the time, candidates who are advantaged by the economy win elections. So that's all those guys up there in that top quadrant. Okay, and if you're not advantaged by the economy, you most often lose. Okay, so the question is, where do we put Obama and Romney on this list? Okay, and my hunch is that it's going to look like this. Obama in the win column, Romney, or whoever the Republican nominee is, in the loss column. But the question for Romney is, how does he push himself up into the win column, being in the economically disadvantaged side? So how does he get up there? Okay, now in order to know what Romney can do to become a member of that set instead of this set, we need to think about what those 4 candidates did to win those elections. Okay, so let's look a little more closely at non-economic messages that were winners. So one of my students used to say, these are the guys who stole elections away from economically advantaged candidates. How do you steal an election away from the guy who's supposed to win it? Okay, so the first thing, I have a couple of criteria for this. The first thing is that you need a lopsided issue. Okay, you're not winning an election on a 50-50 issue. If the electorate is split in half, that is not a winner for you. Okay, you need an issue that is lopsided, and it has to be lopsided in your favor. So you have to be closer to most voters on that issue than your opponent is. Okay, so the third thing is, it doesn't matter if you're closer to most voters than your opponent if your opponent can just come over and adopt the same position as you, or a position right next to you. Okay, so your opponent has to be stuck in an unpopular position. Okay, this is really critical to the success of this issue. You have to figure out what the constraints are, what your opponent's constraints are, and you have to leverage those. So you have to look at the constraints, and you have to figure out a lopsided issue on which your opponent is constrained. That's how you steal the election away from an economically advantaged candidate. Okay, so what did these four candidates do? In 1960, Kennedy was able to take the United States, confrontations with the Soviet Union and weave them into what I call an all-out war for the future of the world. Okay, he talked about a new frontier. Who's going to be the first person to explore space, the first country to explore space? Who will explore the oceans? Whose symphonies will be played in concert halls across the world? Okay, he spun this, everything from space exploration to music to art hanging in museums to our kids are not as well educated at math as the Soviet kids are. He took it to every level of American society, wrapping it all in this package of the new frontier. Okay, so it's big. It's about this big threat. Okay, and why does it work? Well, because Nixon, who was Eisenhower's vice president, is vice president during a time when somehow the Soviets got the upper hand. So wrapped up in this idea of the new frontier is a little concept called the missile gap. Okay, and the missile gap, Kennedy claims, was Nixon was a part of the sort of sloppy environment that let that happen. There's nothing Nixon can do to counter that. Right? Nobody knows that that's not true, that there is no missile gap. Nobody knows that, not even Kennedy knows that. One person, two people in the world know that. Okay, so it's not as if Kennedy's lying, but Nixon couldn't say, we actually do have more missiles than them, because he didn't know that that was true, so he's stuck. Nixon then, having learned a lesson, I'd like to think, does something very similar in '68. So he comes back and running against Humphrey in '68, he runs this campaign on crime and safety, making your environment, your community safer. And he would tell stories about secretaries who didn't feel like they could go out for a walk at night after they had dinner because their neighborhoods were not safe. Okay, so in 1968, in the shadows of Vietnam, the civil rights movement, the free speech movement, all kinds of identity politics, everything that's going on in the 60s. What this is really about, what does it mean for Nixon to say, I want to make your communities safe again? Okay, I want to put more police on the streets. Okay, this is a campaign about race. Even though he never says the word race, he never makes it about race. He talks about an issue that is tangentially linked to race in people's minds. Okay, so he wins. These are all extremely close elections. They're the closest elections in modern history. '76, Carter runs as a Washington outsider. This is mostly all about Watergate. And in 2000, Gore just blows it. Okay, so this isn't so much that Bush had a great issue to steal the election away from Gore. Gore is so irritated with Bill Clinton that he distances himself from Clinton every chance he can get. He will not take ownership of the good economy. So he doesn't talk about it really at all, and instead focuses on domestic policies. So his distancing himself from the Clinton record is what costs him the election in 2000, in my view. Okay, so we're pretty sure that Obama's not going to do that. Okay, he's going to be out there talking about the economy is turning, right? He said that in his State of the Union speech. It's trending in the right direction. So we're not looking at a 2000 type message here. I think that the way forward for the Republicans is some combination of the big global kind of war for the future that we saw in Kennedy's New Frontier, with a little bit of Nixon's implicit appeal to race. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try to suggest is the way forward for them. And I don't mean that normatively, okay? Speaking now purely strategically. If your goal was to win the election, this is what I'm suggesting is the way forward. Now, what's really hard about this, why are there only 4 of these guys? It is hard to take an electorate and shift them off of thinking about the economy and onto thinking about something else, and a very particular something else. First, you have to find what that is, and then you've got to reset the agenda. Okay, super, super hard. And for some people, there just might not be an issue like that. Walter Mondale in 1984, not really sure what he could have done. Okay, so if you don't believe me that this is hard, think for a moment about Barry Goldwater. So Barry Goldwater, who ran talking about nuclear proliferation, went around the country saying that he wanted to disabuse Americans of their fear of the word nuclear, that just a little nuclear power was enough, that he would lob a bomb into the men's room of the Kremlin and make sure that it hit. Okay, so most Americans are not ready for that kind of language. They are afraid they are going to die in a nuclear war. Okay, so he's scaring people, and he's meant to be attracting them. Okay, so candidates get this wrong all the time. They make mistakes when it comes to this, whether it's because there is no issue for them that meets these criteria, or when I asked Michael Dukakis, how did he decide what to focus on in his 1988 campaign? He looked at me as if I was speaking some foreign language. He said, you don't decide what to run on when you run for president. You've been in politics your whole life. It leads to this moment. You stand for things. You run on the things you stand for. You don't decide to run on something. And I sat there and I looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. And I just said, like, dude, that's why you lost, right? Like, no, you have to decide. You have to decide this, you know, especially if you're running against an economically advantaged candidate. Okay, so this is hard. So here we are back at my Romney message. Okay, so what I think works here is appealing to this idea that we are Americans, the greatest nation on earth. So why does it work? It taps into the notion of an American identity. The problem is that nobody really knows what that means. Okay, certainly I don't know what that means. I'd like to know. I've been thinking about it for the better part of 3 years. I can't quite figure it out. And I don't think there's been a lot of work on this in the academy. Okay, so I think we're sort of at a time when things are changing. It has connections to the founding, connections to the past. We saw this in the Tea Party movement, right? They co-opted the symbols of our founding, which are already infused with meaning in our minds. The myths that we associate with the Liberty Bell and George Washington, we learned those in kindergarten. Okay, that's ingrained really deep in us. When a group like the Tea Party can take those symbols and use them for their advantage, that's pretty powerful. Okay, they don't have to infuse those symbols with emotional connection or meaning. That's done. Right, so there's something going on here that I'd like to try to figure out. And it's a connection to the culture or a way of life that's changing rapidly. Okay, and this is what I'm talking about. So these are data from the census. And what you're seeing here is over the decades, you're seeing the circles are population growth. Okay, and the part that is shaded is the part that is minority, so the minority share of population growth over the decades. And you can see the increasing share to the point where in the 2000s, almost all the population growth in the country is by non-white populations. Okay, so in the 100 largest metro areas, whites are 50% of the population. Whites will be a minority in the 100 largest metropolitan areas by the next census. The foreign-born population is increasing. The country will soon be a majority-minority country. 50% of the infants under 1 are non-white. Okay, so the face of America literally is changing. And I think this, in conjunction with this appeal to an American identity, is what makes the message work for the Republicans. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism is here. Okay, I'm going to show you some evidence in a minute about why I think it works, but part of me really believes that a lot of the uncertainty that people feel in these situations is not prejudice as much as it just is anxiety or uncertainty about understanding how to deal with people who are different from you, how to have conversations with them. There's a lot of good work on this actually coming out of Princeton in the philosophy department by a guy named Kwame Anthony Appiah. And he's got a book called Cosmopolitanism that I think tells a really good story about this. As we practice having conversations with people who are different from us, we will become better at it, but we have to practice it. And so I think what's unique about this moment in time is that the environment is changing and we don't have any practice at doing it. So there's a real opportunity here to capitalize on the anxiety. Okay, so how will people react to the changing population? We're going to look a little bit at racial prejudice and how that affects politics and political behavior, with the takeaway that, as disappointing as it may be to some of you, even after the election of Barack Obama, we do not live in a post-racial America. Okay, racial prejudice is alive and well in the United States. We're going to look at two kinds of racial prejudice, what we call old-fashioned measures, which are basic stereotypes, and new or symbolic racism, which is kind of a more subtle or implicit form of prejudice. Okay, so the stereotype questions go like this. Some questions about different groups in society, and we ask these in surveys. Rate each group on the following scale, where 1 means you think almost all of the people in the group are lazy, and 7 means you think almost everyone in the group is hardworking. And there are several of these. Lazy, hardworking, intelligent, unintelligent. There's 4 or 5 of them. Okay, so we ask people to rate groups, and the groups are whites, blacks, Asians, Latinos. I actually did Southerners. I didn't do Texans, but I guess I could have. So any sort of population that people think of en masse. Okay, so what do we find out? Almost half of whites rate whites above blacks on at least one dimension. So they're exhibiting some form of prejudice. The whites, almost half of them are exhibiting some form of prejudice, saying that whites are more hardworking than blacks. Okay, and what makes this a sign of prejudice is lumping the group together. Okay, so thinking of people in a group as being lazy. Okay, if you don't think that that's going to have any effect on people's political behavior, this, I think, is one of the most stunning graphics on American elections I've ever seen. Okay, so my co-author Simon Jackman made this picture, and I'm going to talk you through it. It's a tiny bit complicated, but it hopefully won't be when I'm done. What we've got over here are head-to-head matchups, just like you read about in the news, between the Democrats and the Republicans in 2008 over the course of the year. So some surveys are from January, some from March, some from September, some from December. So we've pitted John Kerry, not John Kerry, I'll come back to him in a minute, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and John Edwards against Mitt Romney, John McCain, Rudy Giuliani, and Mike Huckabee. We've done that a lot of times over 2008. Okay, then we put in the past presidential elections. So that's where we get John Kerry, the final result there. We've got George Bush somewhere in there. Here's Al Gore and George Bush up at the top. Okay, so these are all of the outcomes of head-to-head matchups in the surveys that we asked. If the election were held today, who would you vote for? Okay, here I'm plotting the Democratic share of the two-party vote. So this is the Democratic vote. Now, the different plotting symbols represent people's levels of racial prejudice. So these hollow symbols here, these are people who were neutral or positive on those stereotype measures. So these are people without racial prejudice. The solid dots are people who had racial prejudice. So they had negative views of blacks, okay, on those scales. Okay, so there are a couple things to notice. First of all, these dots are kind of spread all over the x-axis, okay, for the people without any racial prejudice. Over here, for the people with a significant amount of racial prejudice, all of Obama's choices, the elections in which we ask about Obama, are at the lowest part of the Democratic vote share. So for people with racial prejudice, they are evaluating Obama lower than other Democrats. Okay, and just the differences in the Democratic share of the two-party vote, simply the only difference here, these people have neutral racial views and these people have negative views of blacks. And you can see the tremendous difference, 55% of the vote to 25. Okay, it's a big factor. So racial prejudice, even this old-fashioned stereotyping kind of thing, really does separate people in terms of their voting behavior. If we look at a more nuanced view of race, so this is supposed to be a modern kind of racism. The idea is people now know that you can't really say that you think blacks are lazy and whites are hardworking, that is socially undesirable to say out loud, and people won't say it to a survey taker. Okay, so we ask them these questions instead. Agree, disagree. Okay, so we ask you all of these questions, and then we add them together and divide by 4. We make a nice scale of them. Okay, and you end up somewhere on that scale, and you have either high levels of racial animus or low levels. Okay, so a totally different measure, but it works the same way. Okay, so here we've got, again, Obama's vote share, and this is our racial animus. Here you have very low levels of prejudice. Here you have high levels. Okay, people with higher levels of prejudice, less likely to vote for Obama. The black line is all white respondents to our survey in 2008. The blue line, those guys are Democrats. Those are Democrats who were Hillary Clinton supporters in the primary. Okay, even Democrats are less likely to vote for Obama if they have high levels of racial animus. Okay, still probably going to vote for him, but much less likely than the Democrats who have lower levels of racial prejudice. Okay, so this thing is real. These attitudes affect people's voting behavior. Okay, here's pushing it forward to 2012. Okay, if you thought, okay, well, Obama's been president now for 3 years, people have seen that he's not advancing policies that favor blacks, and so they think now, you know, we're in a post-racial world when it comes to elections. It's just not true. Okay, so here's 2011. You see the same kind of shape to the curve. Again, probability of voting for Obama on the y-axis. These are different surveys done in different ways at different times. The result is always the same. Okay, here's the most recent one, January of 2012. This is actually an Obama-Romney head-to-head matchup. And you can see how that works. People with higher levels of racial animus, much less likely to vote for Obama. Okay, so how can you prime this without mentioning race? Okay, well, one of the ways is to take a page from Nixon's '68 campaign. Talk about something that people link to race without actually saying it's about race. And so what I'm suggesting for Republicans is that in this context of the changing face of America, just talking about being an American does that for people. Protecting the idea of my community with my kind of people in it, Americans. Okay, Gingrich is definitely on this. Okay, and this is what he's trying to do when he talks about Obama's vision for America is different than ours. It is not ours. Okay, that is an implicit appeal to race. Okay, so prejudice affects vote choice in these really robust and systematic ways. Okay, so if we step back and we take a look at 2012 and we say, what's the state of play? Economic trends matter more than anything else, matter more than the levels and matter more than anything else that comes up. Okay, Obama will make that the focus of his campaign. If things continue to go the way they are, which I think they will, he'll be advantaged and he'll talk about that. And he will likely win the 2012 election. Okay, but the Republican nominee, I think, has the best chance of beating Obama by shifting onto this American identity message. Okay, it's very, very hard. Okay, it takes someone pretty special to pull that off. Now, of course, the really difficult question here is, do you want to be the candidate who runs that campaign? Okay, so John McCain in 2008, his advisors were telling him the same thing. What is the thing that Barack Obama is constrained on, that he can't change, that he's stuck with? It is his race. And if you want to run a kind of campaign that is going to win, you have to go there. Now, John McCain explicitly told his advisors that he would not go there. He had a list of 15 words that he told them they could not use in any advertising or promotions. And those were words that he thought were somehow linked to race. They were really implicit. And so he made the decision not to do that. The question is, do you want to win the election? Do you want to win the election more than you want to stir up prejudice? Or do you decide that this kind of campaign is not in the best interest of the country and so you don't run it? I know it's a tough question. I'm glad I don't have to figure it out. So we'll open it up for your questions, comments, thoughts, reactions. You guys think I'm crazy? Yes.
You're talking about how an increasing fraction of the U.S. is international. In that idea of promoting a vision of America, would you recommend that Romney kind of bring internationals into the fold as far as now you're Americans?
No, right? That's exactly what he doesn't want to do.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Because what he's leveraging is the idea that the typical American thinks an American is just like them. You know, a 55-year-old white guy living in Iowa. Okay, so when Romney says, no, look, you know, we are the world, right? We're all Americans, that he's diluting the power of this, you know, thing that works for him. Do you see what I mean?
Okay. So you'd recommend that he cater to basically white people? Even
it is his constituency.
fraction of Americans that are internationals increasing.
Yes. Okay, so that's an interesting question, right? If you really think that, you know, somewhere down the road, whites will be a minority in the country, how can you be a party that wins elections with less than 50%, right? Okay. But I think if you're Mitt Romney, that is so far down the road that you really, I mean, I guess I should have started by saying that the assumption here is that Mitt Romney wants to win this election. Okay, he's not concerned about what his party is going to do in 12 years. He wants to win this election. So, yeah, I would tell him that right now, that's this moment in time, that is the sweet spot for him. But you're right. It's, you know, as a long-term strategy for the party, it might not make sense. Yeah.
Do you think Romney's already starting to use this with kind of his "Believe in America" slogan, and also talking about how he thinks that we're facing American declinism? Like in one speech, he said that it's decline, disappointment, and debt.
Yeah.
So do you think that American decline is part of this kind of greater message about Obama represents kind of a new America, which is different from the old America?
No, I don't
50s?
I don't hear any of that from Romney. Right? I know "Believe in America" is the slogan that's on the banners and everything, but that is all about jobs, manufacturing, and the economy. I mean, if you haven't really listened to Gingrich and Romney, go listen to them. They sound very different out on the stump. You know, not just their styles are different, but the kinds of appeals that they make are very different. And Romney is very much on this jobs, I created them, Obama lost them, you know, accountability, you should be able to fire people who don't do their jobs. It's all about, you know, and that's where the decline comes in and America manufacturing. It's not a cultural appeal to being an American, okay, which is what you get when you listen to Gingrich. He says, there are two visions for America's future. We have two Americas, and sometimes he even says, you know, Romney's vision, my vision, and then there's the Saul Alinsky, Obama's vision, right? This two Americas thing, I think it's a great non-economic winning message. I actually loved it the first time John Edwards ran on it in 2004. I thought it was a real winning issue then. Okay, so it's been out there as a viable alternative message for a long time. I don't think Romney's going to pick it up. I don't think that he's comfortable talking about those kinds of cultural and social norms. No. I don't know, it's just a hunch, but he doesn't seem to be comfortable in that milieu. Professor Stevenson.
So does it have to be the candidate? Can the super PACs pick up this message and it work, or do you think it has to be the candidate?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I think however it's going to happen, it has to refocus the election off of the economy. So if you want to leave that all to your super PACs, that's probably fine as long as it's effective. So you probably can't be out there saying something totally different. But the goal is to get people thinking about that thing more than they're thinking about the economy. So redividing the pie, if you will, on a different dimension. So if the super PACs can do that, I think that's probably doable. I think so. Hadn't really thought about it. It's kind of a new thing. Yeah.
Can you talk at all about how the vote responds to this winning the future message you referenced? Do you have any sort of thoughts on that or evidence on that?
Oh, what the voters' response would be?
Sort of Ways of going about this campaign for Romney to win, the sort of dog whistle, hidden message thing, and the winning the future idea.
Yeah, it's not really two ways. It's the winning the future thing is only there because you want the dog whistle thing.
America.
Yeah. Yeah. I think any time Romney spends talking about the economy is only helping Barack Obama win this election. I really think that's true. I think that the growth numbers will be stronger than people think they will be. And historically speaking, I mean, you saw the picture, right? When we have growth at that level, incumbents get reelected. It is easier for an actual incumbent to get reelected than the incumbent party. So the fact that Barack Obama is the same guy is even better for him. Okay, so Americans want to reward incumbents who bring them growth. You know, you can go, there are these elections where both candidates talk about the economy and they compete for creating the economic context. So 1992 is a good example of this, with Bill Clinton out there saying the economy's in the dumper, right? If you guys have seen the movie The War Room, if you haven't, you should watch it, it's fantastic. So number one thing hanging in the war room, it's the economy, stupid, right? That was the thing that they wanted to talk about all the time. And according to our forecasts here, they should have been. But you have poor George Bush out there saying, we're coming out of the recession. What's everybody talking about? You know, things aren't so bad. It's turning around. Come on, people. And you know, so all of that was true. It was just happening too late, right? So the thing about the fourth quarter to the second quarter is that if it's happening in the third quarter, if it's happening in September, it's a little bit too late for voters to actually sense that. Okay, so George Bush is out there, you know, screaming, I'm coming out of the recession. You know, don't think we're not growing. And he's right, but it's just a little too late to have any effect. Okay, so there are these elections where the economy is really mixed and they're competing to say what's going on. But even in those cases, the candidate who's advantaged from quarter 4 to 2 almost always wins the election. Okay, so it doesn't help to try to counter the economic reality. McGovern did this. Okay, he's out there talking about we're going to lower taxes for business because businesses are paying too much taxes and this is bad for them. Okay, in the context of a growing, booming economy, you know, nobody's going to believe him that there's something wrong with the economy, right? There's nothing wrong with the economy. Okay, so it's not, you can't say it enough. You know, if you just send enough messages, people will start to believe you that it's bad. No, people have some sense of what the real economy is. I don't know where they get it from, okay, but they have it. So you can't just go out there and say whatever you want and create the reality. On the other hand, you can't be Gerald Ford either and be a candidate in a growing economy and not talk about it at all. You can't be Al Gore. Okay, so if you don't take credit for it, people might not link it to you. Okay, so you have to be in the reality and you have to talk about it. Yeah.
Sort of like within political science, there's kind of the debate between the pocketbook voting and sociotropic voting, like how people perceive the economy to be going in general, and then voting to want to improve the economy for everyone. So I kind of wonder, is there a disconnect between maybe the growth numbers look good, but people's paychecks aren't growing, wages are stagnant, and so people would say, yeah, that's great, the unemployment rate's going down, but I'm making as much as I did when Obama was president. He failed, we should give the new guy a chance. Could that be a message for Romney?
No, and I'll tell you why. It's a great question, right? And it's a puzzle. Why would you think of the nation's economy before you would think of your own pocketbook, right? Or if you lost your job, okay, so the unemployment rate. Like, why would that matter to you? And so my friend Randy and I were just talking about this last night at dinner. Why is the pocketbook number so irrelevant to presidential election outcomes? My answer to that is always that people evaluate the economy and think a rising tide lifts all boats. So if the nation's economy does better, I'm probably going to do better. Okay, Randy tells me, don't say that anymore. That's not right. Don't say that. Okay, so his take on it is that when you think about evaluating presidents, evaluating your government, you think, what is the government supposed to do? Well, the government isn't supposed to manage my household finances. Okay, the government isn't supposed to make sure that I keep my job. The government is supposed to make sure that the nation's economy is sound and stable so that I can go out and try to get a job. So that people actually are very sophisticated in the way they can attribute blame for things or credit for things. So, you know, any one of those things could be true, both could be true. We could both be wrong. Probably not, but.
The The one thing that's true is that pocketbook voting just doesn't matter with respect when you put it up against the other.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
it's like the unemployment rate,
Can't show
flat
that
line.
it makes any has any effect.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. Oh, okay, one more question.
I would like to ask you about the ethical dilemma you ended up with. So
Yeah.
let's say McCain decided, whatever, I just want to win this election, and he goes with it. And let's say he wins.
Mhm.
And so, in order to win the re-election, would he have to live up to his implicit prejudice invigorating agenda throughout those first term years?
Are you asking if McCain had won in 2008?
On the agenda
Mhm.
of racial prejudice.
Are you asking would he have had to enacted policy along that line? No.
No.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't actually study presidencies, so I don't have a lot of evidence here to talk about how policies, affect people's evaluations. But pretty much, I can tell you that there aren't a lot of voters out there in the campaign evaluating what the president has done over the entire term of his presidency. Voters are very short. They have very short memories. Okay, so super myopic. We look at the most recent past, the last 6 months. Okay, and the other thing is that the things that affect us decay really rapidly. Okay, so we aren't going to hold on to that policy that he enacted in the first year. So I think that I know it seems like wasn't that breaking promises, but he's not out there making promises that he's going to, segregate major metropolitan areas, right? You don't say it out loud like that. So that's what makes the message kind of sneaky but powerful. Only if you can connect it to some existing dimension like crime and safety in '68, or this idea of being an American, which I think is just kind of coming into the focus now. Okay, do we have like 5 or 10 more minutes? Is that the idea?
Some people actually
Okay.
have a class. I actually have a class at 7, but if I can
Okay.
ask another
Oh,
question.
okay, I'll get to you. Okay. Oh, did you have a question?
No, I think-
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah. If the Republican nominee runs on the platform of like racial prejudice and like a culture of America, do you think Obama would be comfortable addressing that? Because it seemed like in 2008 he didn't really want to explicitly address his race. Do you think he would be comfortable addressing it if the candidate sort of had an implicit message of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. In 1988, when George Bush ran a famous ad, I guess it was an affiliated group, ran an ad called the Revolving Door ad, which was about how Michael Dukakis had furloughed first-degree murderers. And the idea that there was, a lot of people said that was not an ad about furloughing prisoners, it was an ad about race. So the takeaway from that was that as soon as Jesse Jackson came out and said, that's an ad about race, the effects of that ad went away. So those lines that I showed you that were sloping down, essentially we would see, as soon as Jesse Jackson came out and said, hey, that's about race, then all of a sudden, people who saw those ads they'd have a flat line now, not a okay. So, if the Republican is out there talking about it's great to be Americans, and we stand on the edge of this global frontier. Who's going to win the economic future? It's going to be us or it's going to be them. Could Obama go out there and say, or one of his surrogates, could Jesse Jackson go out there and say, this is about appeals to race? And would that neutralize it? My sense is that that's a little heavy-handed. Because it isn't as explicit as in this revolving door ad, there was actually a minority going through the prison turnstile. And so it was clear when Jackson said this is about race, you could see why it might be, even though it wasn't what the ad was about. Here I think it's so subtle. And this is me, just my crazy idea. This might not work. This is just kind of a hunch that I have. But I think it's super subtle, and I'm not sure that you could say this is about race, because the plausible deniability then for the Republicans is, Obama is consumed by ideas about race. This is not about race. This is about being an American and going out and competing in the international economic environment. and bringing jobs home. You know, there's lots of plausible deniability there that then they can say that he's just focused on this, you know, idea. So I'm not sure that he could actually do that. But I don't know.
Would you consider the racial message as safe as was the New Frontier or crime and safety? I mean, can it backfire? Because New Frontier doesn't seem like it could backfire.
Yeah. Well, again, this isn't a racial message, right? It's a patriotic message.
Okay.
This is patriotism, right? This is a prideful message. So, you know, if I hadn't connected it to race for you, would any of you have connected it to race? When I first read it to you, did anybody think like, oh wow, that's about like non-whites?
I did, but I'm really cynical.
Okay, well, that's good. So, you know, so I guess I think it's pretty safe.
It seems like it's actually sort of more, it's not just race, it's about the other.
It's about the other, exactly.
Obama's got serious problems.
Yes.
Well, obviously, he's not going to change his race. He's also not going to change where he was born.
Right.
And then his father from another. I mean, in
Yeah.
all these dimensions, he's other.
Yes.
And Gingrich knows this.
Yes.
He's saying it like crazy.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. It isn't just, this is, the idea here is that prejudice in America is no longer black and white. It's not going to be black and white. It's going to be the American and the other. And what that's going to mean, the American identity is going to be the white identity. And then it's about the other. It's about these people who you know, travel all over the world and, you know, eat all these foreign foods and, you know, are cosmopolitan, right? Like, you know, who are these people? Because they're not Americans, right? It's that anxiety that comes from the global identity, I am a citizen of the world kind of thing. No, a lot of Americans want to be citizens of America, not a citizen of the world. Okay, so that's a real tension in this country. I mean, I am not making up. That is a real tension in this country. Okay, and so some smart, clever politician is going to figure out how to leverage that in the context of the changing face of the country. It's a matter of time. Gingrich has already figured it out. He's just not going to be the guy. So, but that's a good point. It's about the other, and Obama really does. He is typecast into that role. He's perfect. Perfect.
Could they adopt a strategy of trying to weaken, say that Romney were to pick up this message, could they adopt a strategy of trying to weaken the message by making Romney seem less fitting the American role? In other words, just trying to highlight that he is not like you in any way.
He isn't, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and maybe that's a little bit of what's going on when they try to paint him as the rich guy billionaire, right? He's not like you either, okay? You know, talk about 1%. He's in the 1% of the 1%. Okay, so, you know, and what does he do in response to that? He tells a story about how his father loaded him into the station wagon, with the dog on the top, drove them across the country until he found a job, and that they didn't have anything, and that his dad had to work his way up through the company selling cars, and right. So he tells this very American story. Hard work will get you ahead. Entrepreneurship, that kind of thing. And so he tries to sew himself in that American identity. But every time that the Democrats say, you know, he's just a rich guy who wants to fire people, doesn't want to pay his fair share of taxes, they're trying to make him look like the other. I think that's fair enough. I think that's a harder sell. Harder sell. I mean, because what do people say, right? Everybody wants to be Mitt Romney. That's what people will say. They might think he's the other, but man, if you had your choice, do you want to be a billionaire paying 15% or not? You know, and the idea is that most people would want to, I guess we could poll on that. You don't think we need to? Right, it'd be interesting if that were related to party ID. You know, because people were sort of, anyway.
So just a quick question about Obama. So you mentioned, or you kind of alluded to this idea of the dog whistle from the Obama campaign, which is actually Romney's dog problem. So this just kind of as a meta issue or minor issue, do you think this actually could have any resonance? And then sort of as the broader issue for Obama, Obama. Let's say the job numbers are kind of illusory at the beginning of the year and it slows down to about 100, 150,000 a month. Should Obama sort of move toward the Elizabeth Warren populist message and sort of kind of plan income inequality?
Well, again, remember the graph, right, on the employment rate change. You can still have increases in unemployment and be doing pretty well. Okay, so even if, unemployment goes up, I'm not worried about that for Obama. For me, it's all about that growth number, the GDP number. But let's just say that it peters out, and so he ends up with just on the margin levels of growth, and it's a coin flip, basically, which it could be. Then it really is a contest for constructing the reality for people. And you could see both candidates hammering away at the economy. But I think that if the Republicans are going to do that, they need to be telling the right economic story. They don't need to be out there saying unemployment's at 8%. They need to be saying that the declines in unemployment have stopped, right? Unemployment is now going up. The growth rate has slowed. We've had no growth. They need to be framing it in terms of the trends, so not in terms of the levels. The income inequality thing is hard, I think. I mean, it's great that so many people are talking about that now, and that it popped up in the primaries as something that candidates were having a real conversation about. I find it really hard to believe that that's a message that can last into the general election. It is a pretty complicated, believe it or not, complicated message, I think, for average voters to appreciate. Do you think I'm wrong?
I don't know. Could it be Obama? Suppose the economy goes bad. Obama needs to find something he can take.
Yeah.
If it's Romney,
that's hard.
Then Romney can't get out of the income inequality box.
You're right. Yeah.
So maybe that's his
insurgent issue. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if the economy's in the middle, maybe he needs one of those issues to even if it doesn't work really well.
It's a great dance that they're playing now. I think you see both sides don't really know what's going to happen, and they've got these backup plans that if we don't end up running on growth, then we paint Romney as the rich guy, and we talk about the middle class, and Romney's thinking that if there is growth, then he's got to be able to talk about something else. I haven't quite seen what his something else is, but they've been talking in the news that he's thinking about it. Anybody else? Last question? Did you guys watch the Florida debates? Anybody watch them? Did you think Romney was better in the Florida debates than he had been in the previous ones? Did you hear that he fired the debate guy who prepped him for Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He was getting, the stories are that the campaign was upset that he was getting so much credit for having turned the campaign around for Romney. And I thought, oh, this is not a good sign. Keep this guy. So, very interesting. So, I don't know, we'll see what happens. You guys can invite me back when Romney wins the election on the economy and tell me how wrong I was. So, thanks very much.
Thank you.